Get comfortable. Seriously, if you haven't already sorted your pillow situation, now is the time. Get the blanket how you like it. Find whatever position your back is going to tolerate, because we're going to be here for a while, and I genuinely don't mind if you fall asleep somewhere in the middle of this. That's sort of the whole idea. So, South Park. I've been watching South Park for a genuinely embarrassing number of years. Started when I was far too young to be watching it, which honestly is how most people started. Nobody's mom sat them down and said, "Here, this irreverent animated comedy full of profanity and outrageous social satire seems like a good fit for your current stage of development." You just sort of encountered it, usually at a friend's house or late at night when you should have been asleep, and then you were hooked. The chaotic energy of it, the way it could be absolutely disgusting and surprisingly sharp in the same 10-minute stretch. But the thing I kept thinking about lately, and this is what we're actually here to talk about tonight, the thing that stayed with me longest isn't any single joke or any specific episode or even any particular character. It's the world, the internal logic of South Park, Colorado, or rather, the complete and consistent lack of internal logic. The way the show has spent nearly 30 years building a universe that cannot hold together under examination, and yet somehow feels completely, specifically, unmistakably itself. That's the interesting bit. That's what we're going to wander through tonight. South Park premiered on the 13th of August, 1997. A small mountain town in Colorado, 4 boys at a bus stop talking about things no primary school children had any business talking about. Stan Marsh in his blue pom-pom hat, Kyle Broflovsky in his green ushchanka, Eric Cartman in his red parka, which became one of the more recognizable pieces of animated clothing in television history, and Kenny McCormick, mostly muffled and mostly not long for this world. That was the setup. That was season 1. I want to spend a moment on that original setup actually, because it's easy to take for granted now, to assume that the premise was always obviously going to work, that 4 foul-mouthed children in a small Colorado mountain town was always clearly a viable format for a long-running television show. It wasn't. In 1997, South Park looked like a novelty. Crude animation, profanity, shocking content, and very little of the structural sophistication that the show would develop over time. The pilot is funny in the way that lots of things that were funny in 1997 are funny in a period-specific, slightly dated way that still has life in it but doesn't quite land the same way it did then. What made it a show rather than an extended joke is something that took several seasons to fully emerge. The characters actually have characters. Underneath the shock comedy and the absurdist plots, Stan and Kyle and Cartman and Kenny were being slowly built into people, not fully formed, psychologically complex people. This is still South Park, but people with consistent internal logics, with specific ways of seeing the world, with relationships to each other that evolved and deepened and occasionally broke. The shock comedy was the entry point. The characters were the thing that kept people coming back. 28 seasons later, as of December 2025, with over 338 episodes, those same 4 boys are still at that same bus stop, still wearing the same hats, still arguing about the same caliber of nonsense. The world has moved on around them in every possible way, and they have not moved at all. And yet somehow it works. Somehow it's not just watchable, but genuinely compelling, season after season, decade after decade, through every shift in culture and politics and television that you can name. I've been thinking about why that is. And I think part of the answer, maybe the biggest part, is that South Park was never actually interested in being coherent. Not in the way that most long-running shows at least try to maintain some version of. The show treats its own rules the way the citizens of South Park treat catastrophe, briefly with mild inconvenience, and then they forget about it and order pizza. And I want to say up front, this isn't really a list of things the show did wrong. I'm not interested in prosecuting South Park for narrative inconsistency. The show is brilliant in too many ways to spend time trying to catch it out. What I find genuinely interesting about these paradoxes is what they reveal about a creative process, and about a fictional world, and about the particular relationship between a show and an audience that's been watching it for nearly 3 decades. A paradox, in simple terms, is a statement or situation that contains a contradiction. 2 things that are both shown to be true, even though they can't both be true at the same time. A boy who is always 10 years old and has also been alive for nearly 30 years. A character who dies every few episodes and is also, it turns out, cursed by a Lovecraftian cult. A mother who is also a father and then isn't, and also the town made that up to protect a football team. That sort of thing. South Park is full of these, absolutely stuffed with them. Some were clearly intentional, the show winking at itself, daring you to notice. Some feel more like the natural consequence of a show that famously produces each episode in roughly 6 days from blank page to broadcast, where the priority is always the joke of the week rather than the continuity of the decade. And some are genuinely strange in a way that's worth sitting with at midnight when you got nothing else to do. We're going to go through them one at a time. There's no rush. We're not trying to reach a conclusion by the end of this, because honestly, the conclusion is just that South Park is a show that makes no sense and has always made no sense and will continue to make no sense, and that's completely fine. The boys will still be at the bus stop tomorrow morning. Kenny will probably die. Nobody will remember. That's the comfort of it, actually, right? Let's get into it. The first paradox isn't the most dramatic one on this list. It's not the one that'll make you sit up straighter or send you down a Wikipedia rabbit hole at 2 a.m. But it's the one everything else is built on, and it's worth taking a moment to actually think through what it means. The boys are 10 years old. They've been 10 years old since around season 2, when the show quietly settled on that number after briefly hovering around 9. And they will, as far as anyone can tell, be 10 years old for as long as the show continues to run. Given that Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a deal in July 2025, guaranteeing at least 50 more episodes across the next 5 years or so, we're looking at the boys being 10 years old well into the 2030s. Think about what that actually means. A child who was born when South Park first aired is now an adult in their late 20s. They've finished school, they might have a job they're ambivalent about, a flat that costs too much, opinions about interest rates. They have grown up in every sense. And the boys at the bus stop have not aged a single day. Not a haircut, not a centimeter in height, not one new tooth. On its own, that's not unusual for animation. The Simpsons has been doing the same thing for even longer. Bart has been 10 and Lisa 8 for over 3 decades, and nobody particularly questions it anymore. It's a comfortable fiction that lets a show run indefinitely without needing to write its main characters into adulthood, which would change everything about what the show fundamentally is. What makes South Park different, what makes the frozen ages feel genuinely strange rather than just a production convenience, is that the show refuses to pretend that time is standing still. It insists on the opposite. South Park does not quietly ignore the passage of years. It charges headfirst into them. The boys reference new technology as it comes out. They talk about the actual internet, actual apps, actual social media platforms that didn't exist when the show started. They respond to real political events, sometimes within days of those events happening. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, the boys were there for it. Masked and frustrated and attending school in bizarre new configurations. When specific politicians did specific things in the real world, the show put analogs of those politicians in their classroom, in their town, in their lives. The town moves forward, the boys do not. That's the contradiction, simply stated. Within the show, time is explicitly tracked, birthdays happen, seasons change. Cartman has referenced being 10 years old in dialogue across episodes separated by nearly 15 years of real-world broadcast time. Kyle has had the same birthday more than once. The boys have been in the 4th grade long enough that any real child starting with them would now have a university degree, a decade of work experience, and probably some ongoing back problem. The post-COVID specials, released in late 2021 and set roughly 40 years in the future, give us the most disorienting version of this. There are adult Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, aged somewhere in their 50s, recognizable but transformed, shaped by everything that happened between the bus stop and that moment. The show knows exactly who these people become. It's thought about it, it's written it down. And then the regular seasons continue with 10-year-olds who know what a smartphone is. There's something slightly vertiginous about holding both of these in your head at once. The show contains a future and refuses to reach it. It knows where the characters are going and won't let them go there. There's another layer to this that I find genuinely underexplored, which is what it means for the surrounding adults. The boys stay the same age, but the parents have quietly aged. Randy Marsh has black hair in the later seasons. Sharon's face carries more lines. The Marshes have clearly been married a long time, in a show where that fact should be impossible given that their son is still 10 and this is the same family from 28 years ago. The show allows the adults to carry time in a way it doesn't permit the children. The result is this quiet inversion of the normal order. Usually, it's the parents who stay the same and the children who grow and change. In South Park, the children are the fixed point, and the adults drift around them, shaped a little by each passing season, acquiring new obsessions and new crises, and new terrible decisions that become slightly more plausible as they age into the kind of people who would do things like that. Randy probably knows this. He probably doesn't think about it. Nobody in South Park thinks about it. It's just the way things are. One more rule the show established without explaining and lives inside without examining. The strangest part might be that the show is rarely coy about any of this. It doesn't try to hide the frozen ages or smooth them over. Characters explicitly say they're 10. Mr. Garrison explicitly teaches them as a fourth grade class year after year. The school has held the same Halloween concert, the same Thanksgiving preparations, the same Christmas play, with the same group of children who are somehow still children, still the same height, still with the same unfinished handwriting. I find it oddly comforting, honestly. There's a permanence to it that most television doesn't offer, no matter what's happening in the world. And 28 seasons worth of world events is a lot of world. You can come back to South Park Elementary and the boys will be there, arguing, getting into something they shouldn't, working out some catastrophically ill-conceived plan that will almost certainly involve the town getting destroyed and then rebuilt by the next episode. They're not going anywhere. They never are. The frozen fourth grade, the starting point, the soil from which several considerably more complicated contradictions will grow. Let's talk about Kenny McCormick. Specifically, let's talk about the fact that Kenny McCormick dies. Constantly, graphically, repeatedly, in ways that range from mundane accidents to genuinely baffling cosmological events, and then walks to school the following morning as if nothing happened. Because for the first several seasons of South Park, that was the whole joke. Kenny dies, Stan says, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny." Kyle says, "You bastards." Scene change. Kenny is fine. It was absurdist. It was dark. It was the kind of humor that makes people who don't watch the show assume it's just edgy nonsense, and makes people who do watch it genuinely fond of a character they never expected to care about. The deaths were elaborate and casual in equal measure. He got hit by a bus, he caught fire, he was eaten, dismembered, launched into space, killed by a lightning bolt, while a very confused girlfriend watched. In the rainforest episode, when Kelly tries to save him with CPR after a lightning strike, Stan and Kyle attempt to recite their usual lines and can't work out who to blame because the lightning is nobody's fault. You know, they're bastards. No notes, perfect. For most of the first 5 seasons, the deaths accumulated without explanation or lasting consequence. They were just the texture of life in South Park. Kenny dies, things continue. And then season 5. Kenny Dies is a genuinely moving episode which is a sentence I wasn't expecting to write about a show where the same character had been executed by falling porta potty not 6 episodes earlier. In Kenny Dies, Kenny is diagnosed with a terminal illness that is portrayed as a muscular dystrophy-type disease. He goes to hospital. He deteriorates. The episode takes his death seriously, his friends visit, there's real grief, and at the end of it, Cartman holds Kenny's hand while he passes. It's quiet, it's kind. Kenny stayed dead. Not for a moment or for an episode, he was absent for most of season 6. Butters was promoted to the main group for a while, then Tweak had a turn, and neither of them fit quite right, which was probably the point. Something was missing. The show was doing something with the absence. He came back at the end of season 6 in the Christmas episode, with no explanation. He walks in, nobody asks where he's been. This is treated as completely normal. The show had killed its running gag, mourned it for a year, and then reinstated it without comment. And somehow that made the whole thing funnier and stranger than it had been before. For several more seasons, the deaths continued. But something had changed slightly. They were less constant. And occasionally when they happened, there was a weight to them that hadn't been there in the early years, like the show was no longer entirely comfortable treating them as pure punchline. Then came the Coon and Friends trilogy in season 14, and everything changed. The boys form a superhero group. Cartman is the Coon, a raccoon-themed vigilante, who is mostly in it for the power and attention. Kenny is Mysterion. And Mysterion is interesting because unlike the other boys, who are clearly just children in costume playing pretend, Kenny seems to take his superhero identity with complete seriousness. There's a weight to him behind that purple mask that none of the others have. During these episodes, Kenny, as Mysterion, stands in front of his friends and tells them plainly that he cannot die. He's been killed many times, he always comes back, and nobody ever remembers. His friends don't believe him. They think he's exaggerating for effect or making up a superpower he doesn't actually have. So Kenny, standing right there in front of all of them, pulls out a gun and shoots himself in the head. The horror in that scene is real. His friends are screaming, they're crying, they hold his body. They genuinely believe they've just watched their friend die. The next morning, Kenny wakes up in his bed. He walks to school. Nobody remembers what happened the night before. He sees the same friends who were weeping over him hours ago, and they look at him with the same slightly distracted expressions they always have, and the day begins again. This is the moment the joke became mythology. Because once the show committed to it, once it said, no, this is actually happening, this is a real thing that a real child is experiencing, it had to explain it. And the explanation it chose is genuinely one of the stranger things animated television has produced. Kenny confronts his parents, Stuart and Carol McCormick, the perpetually impoverished couple who have always been background characters. And they admit it. Years ago, they attended a meeting for something called the Cult of Cthulhu, a worship group dedicated to the ancient, incomprehensible entity from H.P. Lovecraft's mythology, a being of such cosmic scale and indifference that even encountering it tends to drive people into madness. The reason they joined the cult? Free beer. Stuart and Carol McCormick cursed their son to an eternity of violent death and resurrection, in service of a vast and terrifying eldritch horror, because there was complimentary beer at the sign-up meeting. This is genuinely why Kenny cannot die. Not fate, not destiny, not some cosmic significance attached to the boy in the orange parka. His parents wanted a free drink. I don't know about you, but when I first watched that scene, I laughed and then I sat with it for a moment, and then I felt something uncomfortably close to sad. Because here's this child, a child who has been dying for 13 seasons, and the reason is the most mundane, stupid, accidental thing imaginable. His parents weren't evil. They weren't even particularly reckless. They were just broke and thirsty and a bit thoughtless. And their son has been paying for it ever since, in the most literal way possible. The ending of the Coon trilogy is probably the bleakest sustained beat the show has ever produced. Kenny has died and come back again. Nobody remembers, as always. He goes to his friends and he's exhausted, genuinely exhausted, in the way someone is exhausted when they've been dealing with something terrible alone for a very long time. He tells them he's tired, he wants to sleep, and then he shoots himself in the head one more time, just to get there faster. His friends are horrified. Again, they'll forget. They always do. Cut to Kenny's house. Carol McCormick jolts awake, clutching her stomach. She cries out. And in the next shot, she's placing a newborn baby dressed in a tiny orange parka into a crib. She turns to Stuart and says, with a quiet, genuine regret that's almost worse than anything else in the episode, "We never should have gone to that stupid cult meeting." Every death, every time Stan said, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," as a throwaway punchline. Every bus and lightning bolt and porta potty and firework and farm accident. Carol McCormick jolted awake, again and again and again, for years. Retroactively, the joke became a tragedy that had been hiding inside itself the whole time. The paradox of Kenny doesn't end there. The film, South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, from 1999, gives us the clearest example of the show letting him be the fullest version of himself. In it, Kenny ends up in hell, and rather than simply escaping, he maneuvers Satan toward a moment of genuine choice. When Satan offers him one wish as a reward, anything, including his own life back, Kenny doesn't wish for himself. He wishes for everything to go back to the way it was before the war started. All casualties undone, everyone saved. He gives up the one thing that would have fixed his situation to fix everyone else's. He vanishes from hell. He appears above the battlefield, transfigured with wings. It's the most heroic version of a character the show usually plays for laughs. And it's surrounded by fart jokes and profanity, because this is South Park, and it is not going to be earnest about it for too long without giving you something outrageous to balance it. But the heroism is real, the choice is real. And then the next season started, and Kenny was alive again, dying once a week, and nobody mentioned the film's events, which is the shape of the show, the moment of fullness, the return to the pattern. The post-COVID specials, set 40 years in the future, complete the arc in the most unexpected way. Dr. Kenny McCormick, elderly scientist, millionaire philanthropist, is dead. Not from a gag death, not from the curse. He died peacefully, of old age, after a full life well lived. At some point between the 4th grade and his 50s, the curse ended. The loop broke. Kenny got to keep going. He aged, he built things. He died when it was time to die and not before. And he spent that life trying to save his friends. That's the detail that gets me every time I think about it. The one person who should have been the most focused on himself, who had every reason to simply live, finally, without looking back, spent his entire adult life watching the fractures in a friendship and trying to find a way to fix them. A character the show spent years treating as expendable turned out to be the one who cared most. The one nobody noticed was the one carrying the most. There's one more dimension to the Kenny paradox that I keep coming back to, which has to do with muffling. Kenny's voice is physically muffled by his parka. The audience rarely hears him clearly. His dialogue is technically audible. You can make out some of it if you listen carefully, and transcripts exist. But the default experience of Kenny speaking is that you understand the gist without catching the words. He's the character whose voice is literally suppressed by his own costume. I find it hard to believe this is entirely accidental. The show's most overlooked character is the one whose words you can't quite make out. The one carrying the most private suffering is the one whose mode of communication is built around obscuring what he says. The tragedy is encoded in the format. You don't notice Kenny's deaths because you don't fully register Kenny's existence, not because the show fails to put him in frame, but because the frame it gives him is one that prevents complete legibility. There are moments across the series where the muffling drops, where you can hear Kenny clearly, where he says something distinct and audible, and the show acknowledges it without making it a joke. These moments are rare and tend to be emotionally significant. The Mysterion episodes, where he explains his condition clearly and directly, are essentially the show finally unmuffling him, letting his words land the way they deserve to land, and then the parka goes back up and he's muffled again. He has been saying things clearly the whole time. Most people haven't been listening carefully enough to hear them. That's a not worth sitting with. Right, this one. I want to start with a quick bit of South Park television history because the context matters. When season 1 ended in early 1998, it ended on a cliffhanger. The episode was called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut. Not the most elegant title, but accurate. And the premise was that Cartman, fed up with not knowing who his father was, arranges a DNA test with the local genetic engineer, Dr. Mufesto. The entire town gathers for the reveal. There's fanfare, there's build-up, and just as Mufesto is about to say the name, end of season, to be continued. 4 weeks later, season 2 premiered. Fans were expecting the answer. What they got instead was a Terrence and Philip episode. The crude Canadian comedy within the comedy that the boys occasionally watch, which had nothing to do with Cartman or his father or anything that had been set up. It was a deliberate April Fool's prank from Parker and Stone, and it prompted over 2,000 angry emails to Comedy Central within a single week. 2,000 emails to a cable network because people wanted to know who a cartoon child's father was. Which tells you something about how effectively that cliffhanger had worked. The actual answer came a few weeks after that. The reveal: Leanne Cartman is a hermaphrodite, with both male and female biology. She was said to have impregnated another woman. Leanne is not Cartman's mother, she's his father. His biological mother was originally left unknown, and Cartman, disgusted, immediately decides he doesn't want to know. This was canon. This was the accepted truth of the show for 12 full seasons. Characters referenced it. The episode informed how certain fans understood Cartman's unusual upbringing. It was just part of what South Park was. Meanwhile, in season 5, something happened that at the time appeared entirely self-contained. Scott Tenorman Must Die is widely considered one of the best South Park episodes ever made. The setup is straightforward. A 9th grader named Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying pubic hair for $10, claiming it proves Cartman has reached maturity. Cartman, humiliated, spends the entire episode attempting to get revenge. Scott keeps outmaneuvering him, keeps making things worse, keeps making Cartman look foolish. The finale is the thing. Cartman, after all his plans have failed, appears to concede. He invites Scott to a chili con carne festival. He seems almost docile. And then, piece by piece, the episode reveals what Cartman has actually been doing. He arranged for Scott's parents to be shot and killed by a local farmer on the pretense that they were pony thieves. He had their bodies processed into chili. He had that chili served to Scott. Scott realizes what he's eating while he's eating it. He weeps, he collapses. And then at Cartman's signal, the band Radiohead walks out and stands there, watching Scott cry, remarking that he is the most uncool person they've ever seen. Cartman looks down at Scott weeping over the remains of his parents and says with genuine satisfaction, "Oh, let me taste your tears, Scott." The show treats this as Cartman's greatest triumph, his masterwork, the definitive demonstration of what he's capable of when you underestimate him. For 9 seasons, that's what Scott Tenorman Must Die was, a dark, brilliant piece of escalation comedy. An early warning about how far Cartman would go. Then came season 14, 200 and 2-on-1. In these episodes, the show's 200th episode milestone, Cartman learns the truth. The paternity test results from back in season 2 were tampered with. The whole town knew they lied. Leanne is not a hermaphrodite. She's just a woman who had a child with a man the town didn't want to implicate. The man was Jack Tenorman, a right tackle for the Denver Broncos. He'd had an affair with Leon. The town had collectively decided to tell a small child that his mother was intersex and had somehow fathered him rather than create any inconvenience for their football team. Jack Tenorman was Cartman's biological father. Jack Tenorman was Scott Tenorman's father. Eric Cartman and Scott Tenorman are half-brothers, and in the words of a vindicated, unhinged Scott, when he delivers the reveal to Cartman, "You killed your own father, and then you fed him to your half-brother." Sit with the geometry of that for a moment. Cartman's greatest triumph, the moment of perfect, cold, complete revenge that the show held up as the definitive statement of who he is, was retroactively patricide. He had his own father killed. The man he had turned into festival chili was the man whose blood ran in his veins. And the brother he made eat that chili was the only family he had, apart from his mother. The show didn't change anything about what happened in season 5. Not one frame, not one line. The chili was still chili, Radiohead still showed up. It was still exactly what it was. What the Cartman father reveal also does, and this is worth sitting with separately, is retroactively reframe Scott Tenorman. He was the villain of the season 5 episode, or at least the initial antagonist, the one who tricked and humiliated Cartman and got what felt like a just consequence, even if the consequence was horrifying. Scott was unlikable. He was cruel. He picked on a 4th grader for no better reason than that he could. The audience wasn't crying for him. But once 201 establishes that Scott's parents were also Cartman's parents, the Chili Con Carne Festival looks different. Scott watched his father be ground into food and served to him by his half-brother. His grief, which Cartman sat and savored, was grief for a shared parent. And Scott's obsession with revenge, spending time in a mental institution, building an elaborate scheme to force the town to reveal the truth about Cartman's parentage, stops looking like the behavior of a cartoonish villain and starts looking like the behavior of someone whose life was genuinely derailed by something monstrous. The show doesn't rehabilitate Scott Tenorman. He's still antagonistic, still strange, still the leader of the ginger separatist movement in 201, but the information reframes him. He has legitimate grievances. He lost both parents to his half-brother's scheme. His subsequent instability is more understandable than the show initially allowed. The chili changed meaning twice. First when we found out what was in it, then again when we found out who was eating it. But the context around it shifted so completely that the entire meaning transformed. A dark comedy became a horror story. Not because of anything new, just because of information the show had been quietly sitting on for 9 seasons. Cartman's reaction, notably, is not guilt about the murder. He's horrified, yes, briefly, genuinely rattled, but his primary concern once the shock passes is that this revelation makes him half ginger. Scott Tenorman's coloring, which Cartman had mocked for years, is also his own. This is what he can't quite recover from, which is honestly the most Cartman thing imaginable. There's a secondary layer in all of this worth a moment. The cover story, Leanne is a hermaphrodite, she's the father, wasn't just a lie told to Cartman. It was a lie that an entire town maintained collectively for years to protect a football team's season performance, not to protect Leanne, not for any particularly noble reason. The Denver Broncos were doing well, and the truth was inconvenient. And here's what I find interesting about that. The town didn't lie about Cartman's father in a dramatic, conspiratorial way. They just didn't correct it when the wrong answer was given. They let the convenient story stand. They convinced themselves that the inconvenient truth could wait, and then it waited so long it became the subject of the show's 201st episode, emerging from a decade of comfortable suppression to detonate in the most spectacularly awful way possible for everyone involved. That's actually how most cover-ups work, not grand conspiracy, just the quiet choice, made again and again to let the convenient version be the version people live inside. The cover story the town told was one more rule that held until the moment it couldn't. There are paradoxes in South Park that are entirely fictional, things that exist only inside the world of the show, contradictions the writers created and chose not to resolve. And then there's this one, which sits at a strange intersection between the fictional world and the real one, in a way that's a bit harder to process. Chef Jerome Muckleroy, school cafeteria chef, the one adult in South Park who consistently had good advice and genuinely warm feelings toward the boys, was voiced by Isaac Hayes from the show's first episode. Hayes was a Stax Records legend, the man behind Shaft, one of the most recognizable voices in American soul music. His chef was the show's beating heart in a lot of ways, the one reliable source of sanity, the one who'd notice when things were going wrong and try to help, usually while delivering some variation of advice that got derailed into something extremely inappropriate, but the intentions were always good. Hayes voiced Chef across 9 seasons, and then he left. The timing of his departure in March 2006 followed the broadcast of Trapped in the Closet, the season 9 episode that satirized Scientology, which Hayes was a member of. He released a statement citing the show's religious intolerance and bigotry. Parker and Stone responded publicly, noting that South Park had satirized virtually every religion and institution it could reach, and that Hayes had never previously objected to any of it. They suggested the objection had arrived precisely when the specific institution he was affiliated with became the target, and that this wasn't a principled position about religious sensitivity so much as a personal one about personal loyalty. Whether that characterization is fair is a bit beside the point of what we're here to discuss. The fact is, Isaac Hayes left. He was announced as having resigned from South Park, though his son later said the decision was made for him after his stroke. The show's response came in the season 10 premiere just weeks after Hayes' departure was announced. The return of Chef. Chef comes back to South Park, but something is wrong. He's been traveling with a group called the Super Adventure Club, and whatever they did to him there has changed him profoundly. He says disturbing things. He behaves erratically. The boys try to stage an intervention. They try to remind him who he was. Nothing quite works. Near the end of the episode, Chef falls from a bridge. Then he's struck by lightning. Then he's mauled by a mountain lion. Then by a bear. Then he's impaled. The deaths accumulate with the same kind of escalating absurdity that was applied to Kenny across many seasons. But where Kenny's deaths always felt almost cheerful, Chef's final sequence is played with a kind of nastiness underneath it, a bitterness. The final image, Chef's destroyed body reassembled into a Darth Vader parody called Darth Chef, implying his resurrection into something irredeemably different from what he was. He growled. He vanished. He has never appeared in the show again. The audio throughout the episode, Chef's voice is spliced together from recordings Hayes made across the previous 10 seasons, not Hayes performing new lines written for this episode. Old lines cut up and reassembled to fit a new context. There are moments where the stitching is audible, where the phrasing doesn't quite flow the way it would if someone had sat down and recorded it in sequence, where a sentence turns in a direction that a naturally spoken sentence probably wouldn't. Here's the paradox, and it's a strange one. In a show where death is essentially meaningless, where Kenny reappears cheerfully the following day, Chef's death is treated as permanent. The show made a point of it. The boys grieved him genuinely, briefly. There was no bus stop appearance the following week. The cafeteria stayed empty. There's something I keep thinking about with the Chef situation that doesn't get examined much, which is what the show was without him. Chef had been the one genuinely warm presence. The adult who saw the boys clearly, who gave them real advice even when that advice was constantly derailed into something inappropriate, who was simply on their side without any agenda of his own. After he left, the show didn't replace him with anything equivalent. The adults who've had sustained roles in later seasons, Peasy Principal, Randy's increasingly dominant arc, the rotating cast of town authority figures, none of them occupy the same emotional position. They're funny, some of them are even lovable in their own chaotic ways, but none of them are straightforwardly kind in the way Chef was. It's possible the show didn't notice this or decided it didn't matter. It's also possible Parker and Stone knew exactly what they were doing, that removing the one uncomplicated source of warmth was a deliberate creative choice, a way of shifting the show's register towards something a little colder and a little more cynical. The early seasons have a specific temperature to them that later seasons don't quite match. Whether that's a result of Chef's absence, or of the show simply maturing into a darker self-image, or just of 20 years of production changing the texture of the thing, is hard to say. What I can say is that there's a particular episode from the early seasons, any of the ones where Chef would notice something was going wrong with the boys and pull one of them aside to talk it through, that the later show simply doesn't have an equivalent of. That specific moment of an adult who genuinely sees a child and decides to do something about it belonged to Chef. And when he left, it went with him. The one character for whom death had always been a punchline got a proper, final ending. The one character for whom death should have been as reversible as anyone else's got written out permanently. And the character was punished in his fictional death in a way that reflected real-world frustration. Parker and Stone were clear. They weren't angry at Chef, the character, only at Hayes and the manner of his departure. But the episode doesn't entirely hold that distinction cleanly. Chef's final scenes, built from stitched together recordings of words Hayes said in other contexts and years, are not kind. What lingers once you hold all of it at once is this: a real person's voice, recorded over many years in service of a role he once loved, was used after he'd left that role to narrate a death that the show needed him not to fight back against. Because he wasn't there to fight back against it. He'd already gone. In South Park, Colorado, nothing stays dead, except Chef. The warmest person in town got the most permanent ending, and the show moved on the following week, as it always does. There's also a chronological strangeness to Chef's departure that doesn't get examined much. The show has been very good at incorporating real-world events into its episodes almost in real time. That's the whole premise of the 6-day production cycle. But Chef's departure from the show was an event that happened in the real world, and the show's fictional response to it came in the season 10 premiere, which means the response was essentially immediate. This is different from how most shows handle actor departures. Usually the gap between a departure and the on-screen resolution is significant. A season break or a mid-season absence that builds to a proper farewell, or the quiet recasting that happens when nobody wants to draw attention to it. South Park processed Hayes' departure almost faster than the news cycle had finished with it. The Return of Chef aired 9 days after Hayes' public resignation statement. The speed of it is characteristic of the show, but it also means that the episode's decisions to use spliced archive audio to kill the character, to frame the death as a result of cult brainwashing, were made under the pressure of the same urgency that makes every South Park episode. Not much time to think about it. Not much time to decide whether this was the right approach, or the kind one, or the most thoughtful version of an inherently difficult situation. It came out the way it came out. The chef's hat is in a drawer somewhere. The cafeteria served things that were never quite as good after that. But something about the warmth of the early years went with him, and not every subsequent season has quite found its way back to it. Since we're on the topic of things the show treats as simultaneously real and not real, let me talk about Imagination Land. The Imagination Land trilogy ran across 3 episodes in season 11 in the autumn of 2007. It later got assembled into a feature-length director's cut for home release, which gives you some idea of how proud Parker and Stone were of it. It's probably the most formally ambitious thing the show had attempted up to that point, a sustained piece of surreal storytelling that also happened to be, in its own chaotic way, a genuine meditation on what it means for something to be real. It starts improbably with Cartman making a bet with Kyle about leprechauns. Cartman claims that if leprechauns are real, Kyle has to perform a very specific act involving Cartman's anatomy. Kyle, reasonably confident that leprechauns are not real, agrees. Within minutes, a leprechaun appears. Kyle is contractually obligated. He refuses. The legal dispute over this contract runs as a subplot through all 3 episodes, which tells you everything you need to know about how this show operates. Before that subplot can resolve, something else happens. The boys are taken by a strange man in a hot air balloon to Imagination Land, a place where every being and creature ever imagined by a human mind exists, in full, living out their imagined existence. Santa Claus is there. Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia is there. Gandalf, Luke Skywalker, Strawberry Shortcake, Popeye, Jason Voorhees. The woodland critters from Cartman's own deranged Christmas story. Every imaginary thing that was ever thought up with enough conviction, all existing simultaneously in this single shared space. And then terrorists attack. This is where the episode gets into genuine philosophical territory, even while being completely absurd about it. The terrorists destroy the barrier between the benign side of Imagination Land and the evil side, the place where all the dark imaginings live, the monsters and killers and nightmare things. The evil pours through. Imaginary characters start dying. Strawberry Shortcake is brutalized by things that would give a real person nightmares. The Council of Nine, which includes Jesus, Aslan, Gandalf, Zeus, and several others, convenes to figure out what to do. The United States government gets involved because it turns out they have their own access point to Imagination Land. Project Imagination Doorway, a portal they developed during the Cold War. The military's proposed solution: nuke the whole place. Destroy Imagination Land entirely and neutralize the threat. Kyle, who has ended up at the Pentagon, argues against this. His argument is the genuinely interesting bit. Imaginary characters, he says, are real. Not in a physical sense, not in the sense that they have bodies you can touch or addresses you can visit, but in the sense that they have had more impact on people's lives than most real people ever will. The stories they come from have given people courage, comfort, meaning, something to hold on to during difficult periods of their actual real lives. They are real in every way that matters. Killing them isn't a military operation, it's a loss. The government launches the nuke anyway. Everything in Imagination Land is destroyed. Aslan, Gandalf, all of it gone in a single blast. And then Butters, who has been trapped inside Imagination Land through all of this, finds himself alone in a white void. Just Butters in the blank space left behind. And Butters imagines it all back, because he can. Because that's how imagination works. He thinks about what was there, and what was there comes back, exactly as it was. Here's the nut. If imaginary characters can be killed by a nuclear weapon, which implies they can be genuinely hurt, that their suffering is real, that their deaths have weight, then what does it mean for Butters to simply recreate them? Are these the same characters who died, restored, or new versions of them that didn't experience the horror of the nuclear destruction? Were their deaths real or not? The show doesn't answer this. It can't really, because answering it would collapse the whole premise. If Butters can just imagine them back, then they can't have been truly killed. But the episode clearly wants you to feel that they could be truly killed. It wants the nuclear strike to matter. It wants the loss to be real enough to justify Kyle's argument. It wants both, and it can't quite have both. What makes it stranger is what surrounds this in the show's broader mythology. South Park's universe contains a living Jesus Christ who hosts a local public access chat show, gets into fistfights, and appears to have moderately limited powers. It contains Satan, who runs hell and is emotionally complicated. It contains God, who is a small, slightly ambiguous entity who occasionally makes appearances and doesn't say much. Are these figures real or imaginary within the show's universe? The show treats them as real. They interact with the boys, they affect plot outcomes, they have feelings. But Jesus also appears in Imagination Land, sitting on the Council of Nine alongside Luke Skywalker and Popeye. apparently equal in status to explicitly fictional characters. And Santa Claus, who visits South Park in the Christmas episode as a real person with genuine physical presence, who gets into fights and has feelings and participates in events, is also found inside a bear suit in 200, used as a decoy, comfortably available for that purpose without anyone finding it strange. Santa occupies a space somewhere between the firmly real and the definitely imagined, and the show is comfortable leaving him there without forcing a decision, which might be the most honest depiction of Santa Claus in all of fiction, actually. The South Park version doesn't resolve the tension between real and imagined. It just makes it visible. Santa is whatever he needs to be in this world, and the world accommodates him either way. The Imagination Land trilogy is the most earnest the show has ever been about asking what reality is and about the genuine weight of imagined things. And its answer sort of both. Everything is a bit real and a bit not real. The nuke matters and also doesn't matter. Butters can rebuild what was destroyed, which means the destruction didn't stick, which means the whole question remains permanently open. It's not a bad answer, it's just a very South Park one. There's also a version of the Imagination Land premise that I find quietly wonderful, which is what it says about the collective imagination. Not any one person's imagination, Butters' imagination, which saves everything at the end, but also the aggregated imagination of all of human culture across all of history, producing Aslan and Gandalf and Strawberry Shortcake and Jason Voorhees, and depositing them all in the same shared space. Imagination Land is the place where all human invention goes to coexist. The benign and the malevolent and the ridiculous, all real in the same sense, all occupying the same geography. It's a generous idea about creativity, about how every imagined thing once imagined with conviction enters a kind of shared existence. How the things people create in their minds accrue a reality that persists beyond the moment of their creation. How the fact that millions of people have imagined Gandalf specifically in great detail over many decades has made Gandalf something. Not a physical thing, but something. The show uses this idea mostly for jokes and for an extended legal dispute over whether Kyle has to perform an act involving Cartman's anatomy. But the idea underneath the jokes is actually quite lovely if you let it be. And here's a fun detail that I think is genuinely underappreciated, even by people who know the Coon and Friends arc well. Kenny McCormick's superpower, the thing that makes him Mysterion, the thing that separates him from the other boys who are simply wearing costumes, is the show's oldest running joke. The thing that everyone laughed at, and maybe some people stopped laughing at, and maybe some people never really thought about as anything other than a gag. Kenny dies. That's the whole thing. That's his character note. And then the show turned it around and said, what if that was the point? What if the joke was always the mythology and we just hadn't looked at it that way yet? It's an unusual creative move. Most shows, when they revisit an old bit and try to give it depth, do it in a way that feels grafted on, like someone decided retroactively that a punchline needed meaning. The Mysterion arc doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like Parker and Stone looked at Kenny and thought about what 12 or 13 seasons of dying and coming back in total isolation, without any acknowledgement or memory from the people around you, would actually do to a person. Not as an abstract thought experiment, as a real thing that happens to a real character. The answer they came up with, it would make you very, very tired. There's a scene where Kenny as Mysterion stands in front of his friends in the superhero headquarters, which is the back of one of their parents' houses because they're children, and tries to explain what his power actually is. He's been trying to tell them something true about himself, something real, the kind of thing you'd only be able to say to people you trusted completely. His friends don't believe him. They think he's being dramatic or making things up to seem more interesting or misunderstanding what his actual superpower might be. So he picks up a gun and shoots himself. The silence after that. The sounds of his friends reacting. And then the next morning, Kenny is alive. and no one can explain why, and no one quite remembers what they were so upset about. The show was doing something genuinely emotionally sophisticated in those 3 episodes. Wrapping it in superhero parody and profanity, yes, because this is still South Park, but underneath the parody was something real about what it costs to have an experience that nobody else can validate. About what it's like to try to tell people something true about yourself and have them simply not have the capacity to receive it. There's a theory that floats around fan discussions of the show, never confirmed, never denied, which is exactly the right state for a good theory, that Cartman has occasional flashes of awareness about Kenny's deaths. Not full memory, not complete understanding, just moments. The proposed mechanism is a corneal transplant Cartman received in one episode from a donor who turned out to be Kenny. Through Kenny's eye, Cartman sometimes perhaps sees what Kenny sees, knows what Kenny knows. Briefly, is this supported by the text? Loosely, in the way that fan theories are always loosely supported by the text. You can find moments that fit if you're looking for them. Has the show ever confirmed it? No. Denied it? Also no. It sits there as a possibility, and as possibilities go, it's a rather good one. Because it would mean that the one person in South Park who occasionally carries some version of Kenny's memory is the one person least inclined to do anything compassionate with that information. The universe's sense of humor at work. And then there's what Mysterion's identity actually represents from a structural standpoint. The show treated it as a genuine mystery for a stretch. The audience wasn't supposed to know who was behind the mask. And the in-universe reaction of the town was supposed to mirror the audience's confusion. The eventual reveal, it's Kenny, it was always Kenny, lands with a quiet finality. Of course it's Kenny. Who else would have that particular superpower? Who else would have kept it this secret, this long, from people who couldn't have helped even if they'd known? What stays with me about Mysterion ultimately is what the arc says about recognition, about how much a person needs to be seen. Kenny had been dying, alone, unremembered, for over a decade of real-world broadcast time before the show finally acknowledged what was happening to him. And when it did, it gave him a moment, a single moment, of articulating the full weight of it to people he loved, before those people forgot it had ever happened. One moment of being truly seen, and then back to the orange parka and the muffled voice and the next death nobody will remember. The Mysterion episodes are the show at its most unexpectedly generous, toward a character it had always treated as expendable. And the generosity makes the forgetting every time feel like it costs something. Now let's talk about 200 and 201. These aired in April 2010, season 14, and they are, by some margin, the most complicated thing South Park has ever produced. Not the funniest, not the most technically impressive, not the most emotionally resonant. The most complicated, because they exist simultaneously as a television event, a piece of meta-commentary on the show's own history, a controversy about religious satire and free expression, and a paradox that the show could not have designed more neatly if it had tried. The premise of 200, every celebrity South Park has ever mocked returns to file a class action lawsuit against the town. Tom Cruise is there, Rob Reiner is there, Barbra Streisand reconstituted from her earlier destruction. An enormous roster of people the show spent 13 seasons brutalizing, all assembled, all furious. They have one demand. They want Muhammad. Specifically, they want to use Muhammad's apparent immunity to mockery, the prophet of Islam, whom South Park had by that point been refusing to depict for some time to protect themselves. Here's the bit that adds a layer to this. South Park had previously shown Muhammad without incident. In the season 5 episode Super Best Friends, a superhero parody featuring various religious figures, Muhammad appeared on screen clearly doing things as a character. Nobody objected. This was 2001. By season 10 in Cartoon Wars, the climate had changed enough that a planned depiction of Muhammad in a Family Guy episode became a plot point. The South Park episode was itself about whether to show the image. Comedy Central censored the actual depiction from the South Park episode. The network made the decision, Parker and Stone didn't. By season 14, in 200 and 201, the depiction of Muhammad was again central to the plot. And this time, shortly after the first episode aired, a fringe website associated with radical Islamism posted what appeared to be a threat against Parker and Stone, referencing what happened to a Dutch filmmaker years earlier. Comedy Central's response to 201 extensive censorship. Muhammad's name was bleeped every time it was spoken aloud. Visual depictions were covered, and most significantly, the episode's moral of the story. The final speech, delivered by Kyle, Jesus, and Santa Claus, about fear and intimidation being effective tools for suppressing speech, about what happens to a society when people stop saying true things because they're afraid of what might happen to them. That speech was censored in its entirety, bleeped out completely. The lesson of a free speech episode in a show about the right to satirize anything, delivered by the show's moral compass, was silenced by the network that broadcast it. The episode that argued that giving into threats enables more threatening had been given into. The speech about how intimidation works had been successfully intimidated out of existence. Parker and Stone were furious. They posted a statement on their website making clear that Comedy Central had made the decision to censor, not them. The text of the original speech was eventually leaked, and it isn't particularly incendiary, it's just Kyle talking about what the episode was about. It reads like the kind of moral that would close out a dozen other South Park episodes without anyone noticing. But it was gone, and it remains gone. 200 and 201 have never been legally rebroadcast in the United States. They are not available on any streaming service. They don't exist on the official South Park platform. They sit in a legal gray area, and the only way most people have seen them is through unofficial means. This creates a genuinely odd situation. The Cartman father reveal, one of the most significant character moments in the show's entire run. The resolution of a mystery that began in season 1 is contained within episodes that officially don't exist in accessible form. If you want to understand the full arc of Cartman's family history as the show intended it, you have to find footage through channels the show itself cannot point you toward. The free speech episodes cannot be freely distributed. I don't want to be heavy-handed about this because I don't think it's a conspiracy or a grand irony that anyone planned. It's just the way things landed. But there is something genuinely strange about a show that has spent nearly 30 years arguing, loudly, crudely, relentlessly, for the right to say anything to anyone, having 2 episodes that represent its fullest articulation of that argument locked away where almost no one can see them. The episodes exist. The point was made. And then circumstances conspired to make the point nearly impossible to encounter. The paradox isn't in the show in this case, it's around it. The world did to 200 and 201 what those episodes were trying to warn about, which is either deeply ironic or deeply illustrative depending on how you want to look at it. Of all the characters who have changed across the show's run, Mr. Garrison is the one who has changed the most in the most categorical ways and still somehow remains recognizably himself throughout all of it. I find that genuinely unusual. Let me explain why. He starts as a teacher. This is his defining characteristic in Season 1, Mr. Garrison teaches the boys, has complicated feelings about several things, and carries around a hand puppet named Mr. Hat, who says the things Mr. Garrison claims not to be thinking. The puppet is, from the very start, treated as a psychological externalization of a self the character hasn't acknowledged yet. Mr. Hat is rude in ways Mr. Garrison isn't. Mr. Hat expresses feelings Mr. Garrison suppresses. Mr. Hat, being a puppet, gets to be honest. There's a recurring bit early in the show where Mr. Garrison says something openly bigoted and then immediately looks horrified and says, "I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that. That was Mr. Hat." Mr. Hat didn't say anything. Mr. Hat is a puppet. Mr. Garrison said it. The gap between what the character claims and what the character does is the whole joke. And also, as the seasons progress, the whole tragedy of him. He comes out as gay eventually. This is handled, as most things in South Park are, with a mixture of genuine engagement and complete disregard for sensitivity. But the underlying character continuity holds. Garrison becomes openly what he'd always been suppressing, and Mr. Hat, once his function as a denial mechanism is no longer necessary, gets retired. The puppet goes into a drawer. The character no longer needs it. Then, in Season 9, Mr. Garrison undergoes gender confirmation surgery and becomes Ms. Garrison. This runs through several seasons. Ms. Garrison has relationships, has a different social experience, exists in the town in a different way. The show's handling of this is, in typical fashion, uneven at best. It uses the transition in ways that are sometimes thoughtful and frequently not. But what's interesting from a continuity perspective is that the show commits to it. This is who the character is now. Then, in Season 12, Ms. Garrison decides to reverse the surgery and return to being Mr. Garrison. The stated reason, the experience of being a woman was not what he had expected, and he has concluded that he was a man all along. He detransitions surgically and becomes Mr. Garrison again. Mr. Hat comes out of the drawer. Then seasons 19 through 21 add something categorically different. Mr. Garrison, 4th grade teacher at South Park Elementary, becomes a Donald Trump analog running for president of the United States of America. He wins, he becomes president, he is terrible at it. This is not a subtle point. Mr. Garrison tries at various points to get himself fired or removed. He doesn't manage it for a while. Eventually, after a sequence of events involving his own sexual behavior, he loses the presidency and returns to South Park. He is back in the classroom by season 22. The transition from classroom teacher to President of the United States to classroom teacher again is not extensively explained. The town and the school seem to accept his return with the same blithe indifference they apply to everything else. And throughout all of this, gay, straight-presenting, trans, cisgender again, presidential, post-presidential, Mr. Hat has had an inconsistent but never fully explained existence. In 200 and 201, it's Mr. Hat, through Mr. Garrison, who holds the key information about Cartman's father. The puppet, supposedly an inanimate object that Mr. Garrison controls, knew the truth and key when Cartman asks about it. Mr. Garrison is initially reluctant, and then Mitch Connor says that he is an old friend of Mr. Hat's, not Mr. Garrison's Ison's, Mr. Hat's. The puppet has friendships. The show has never committed to a clear answer about what Mr. Hat is. Sometimes he's clearly just a puppet that Mr. Garrison uses as a psychological tool. Sometimes the show implies he has independent existence, independent knowledge, independent relationships. The ambiguity is the point. Mr. Hat is as uncertain as the character carrying him. What the accumulated identity of Mr. Garrison amounts to when you lay it all out is a character who has tried on every major category of selfhood the show could give him and found none of them quite right. Who started as someone who couldn't say the true things about himself and ended up as someone who has publicly been almost every possible version of a person and is still somehow the same aggrieved, complicated presence in a 4th grade classroom. Some characters are paradoxes because of what the show does to them suddenly. Mr. Garrison is a paradox because of the gradual accumulation of everything. He doesn't contradict himself in a single moment. He contradicts himself across a decade and a half, so slowly that each individual step seems almost logical, until you zoom out and realize no single unified person could be all of these things sequentially and still be coherently one character. And yet, he's unmistakably himself in every version. Mr. Hat sits in a drawer somewhere in his classroom, apparently knowing things its owner claims not to know. Still waiting to be needed, that's probably the strangest thing about him. The other thing worth noting about Mr. Garrison's impossible arc is that it seems to have generated almost no sustained internal reflection within the show itself. Not one episode has Mr. Garrison sit down and process what it meant to have been sequentially a repressed gay man, an out gay man, a trans woman, a cisgender man again, and the President of the United States. Not one episode treats this accumulation of identities as something that deserves examination, even from the skewed angle that South Park typically uses to examine things. This is almost certainly intentional. The show has never been interested in Mr. Garrison's inner life as a subject of earnest exploration. He's a satirical figure, a vehicle for commenting on the institutions he moves through, education, gender politics, electoral politics, rather than a character whose psychology the show is interested in rendering with care. But the result is that he carries all of this history around with him visibly in every subsequent appearance, and nobody mentions it. Mr. Garrison stands in his classroom in season 27, back in his old role, and the previous 15 seasons of transformation and reversal and presidential catastrophe sit behind him like a shadow that nobody looks at directly. It's a kind of amnesia the show applies selectively. Some characters carry their histories very explicitly. Cartman is marked by every scheme and every betrayal, even when the show pretends otherwise. Others carry theirs invisibly. Mr. Garrison wears his as something the camera quietly moves past, season after season, treating the accumulated strangeness of his life as simply the condition under which he teaches fourth grade. Let's move to the post-COVID specials. They represent the most ambitious thing South Park has attempted in its later years, and they contain a paradox so elegantly constructed that I suspect even Parker and Stone didn't fully realize how tightly it tied itself. The specials aired at the end of 2021, set approximately 40 years in the future, showing us what South Park and the world looks like after a version of the COVID pandemic that never fully ended. The quarantine stretched on, the town changed, people moved away or stayed and grew bitter or didn't survive it. The boys became adults. Stan Marsh moved to a city and works as an online whiskey consultant. He's disconnected, a bit hollowed out, wearing the look of someone who made peace with things they probably shouldn't have made peace with. Kyle Broflovsky is still in South Park, still trying, still caring, still slightly too earnest for his own good, still the person everyone calls when something needs to actually be handled. And then the call. In the first post-COVID special, Dr. Kenny McCormick, eccentric scientist, millionaire philanthropist, brilliant and apparently beloved, is dead. Dead. As we talked about earlier, at some point between childhood and this future, the curse ended. Kenny got to keep going. He aged, he built things, he accomplished things. He died when it was time to die and not before, and not violently and not pointlessly. He got the ordinary death that the curse had denied him for years. The show doesn't tell us when or how that happened. It simply presents the result. The hard drive they find in Kenny's remains contains a video message. In it, Kenny explains what he's been doing for decades. He watched his three friends become increasingly estranged from each other. He watched the friendship that had defined all of their lives corrode and eventually collapse. He spent his adult life in his laboratory trying to fix it. He built a time machine, he ran calculations, tested different approaches, modeled timelines. And his conclusion, the friendship broke because of the pandemic, and the way to fix the future is to go back and prevent the pandemic. The mechanism of the pandemic, per South Park's characteristically unbothered mythology, Randy Marsh had sexual intercourse with a pangolin. This happened in Wuhan. The virus originated from that encounter. Here's the paradox that sits quietly at the center of all of this. Kenny ran calculations across hundreds of different timeline models. He tested every approach he could think of to prevent the pandemic. And in every single model, Randy had sex with the pangolin, always, without exception. Not because the universe was conspiring against him, not because of fate in any cosmic sense, but simply because Randy Marsh is Randy Marsh. And given those circumstances, he always makes the same choice. The situation recurs and Randy responds the same way he always would because that's who he is. The past can be reached, the choice cannot be changed. Randy says this himself when confronted. He isn't apologetic about it exactly, he just notes that they can't change what he did. They can only change how people think about it. And he might be right. Not because free will doesn't exist, but because the kind of free will that might have led to a different choice in that moment would have required Randy to be a fundamentally different person, and he isn't. The other detail from the post-COVID specials that I find quietly affecting is what happened to Butters. Butters Stotch, the show's most reliably cheerful character, the boy with the endless optimism and the parents who ground him for everything, the one who always seems to emerge from whatever disaster the show throws at him with roughly the same bewildered goodwill, didn't emerge from the pandemic world okay. In the future timeline, Butters has been in a mental health facility for 16 years. The name he goes by there is Victor Chaos, a reference to his occasional villain alter ego from the earlier He's been there since he spent over 16 years grounded in his room after his parents went to a movie and never came home. A home. He was grounded, he stayed in his room, and they never came back. 16 years of being a boy who follows the rules and trusts that the people who make the rules will eventually return to acknowledge that he followed them. They didn't. They just left. When Stan and Kyle find him, and Butters as Vic slowly starts to remember who he is, the warmth is still there, under the performance, under the 16 years, still Butters. Still wanting to help, still capable of the same goodwill that got him into so much trouble in the first place. He helps them, of course he does. And in the timeline that's restored when things go right, that Butters never existed. The version of him that waited is undone. The current Butters, perpetually grounded, perpetually cheerful, perpetually just outside the door, wanting to know if everyone is having a good time, never goes through any of that. Some losses only exist in the timelines we fix. Now here's the loop that ties all of this together. Kenny spent his life trying to fix the friendship because watching it break had been the formative tragedy of his adult existence. The friendship broke partly because of the pandemic. The pandemic could theoretically be prevented. But preventing it would require going back, which Kenny spent years trying to set up. Which means the attempt to fix the future was itself shaped by the broken future. The motivation to travel back in time only exists because the timeline went wrong. If the timeline hadn't gone wrong, Kenny wouldn't have spent his life building a time machine. Which means the time machine, the only tool that could fix things, is a product of the very damage it's trying to undo. There's no clean way out of that. The loop is closed. Every approach Kenny tried, in every calculated timeline, led back to the same problem. The past is accessible, but the kind of change that would genuinely fix things would require altering something fundamental about who these people are. And you can go back, you can show up in the past, but you can't make Randy Marsh not be Randy Marsh. The last thing Kenny did with his life was leave a message for his friends, hidden where they find it if they looked hard enough, telling them the truth. You're the problem, and you're also the only people who can fix it. What makes this particular time loop more poignant than most, I think, is what it says about the limits of intelligence applied to human problems. Kenny is, in the future timeline, extremely smart. He built a time machine, he ran comprehensive theoretical models, he did everything a brilliant person could do to solve a problem that other people weren't equipped to solve. And all of that intelligence ran up against the fact that the problem wasn't solvable through intelligence. The friendship broke because of who these people are, and who these people are isn't a variable that a time machine can adjust. Stan's disconnection is Stan's. Kyle's insistence on trying to fix everything is Kyle's. Cartman's comfortable self-interest is Cartman's. Kenny's capacity for quiet devotion is Kenny's. These are character traits that were established in the first season and have held across every subsequent version of these people, including the adult versions in a ruined future. The characters are more constant than the universe they inhabit. The rules change, they don't. So Kenny's 40-year quest ends not with a solution, but with a message. Here's what I tried. Here's where it went wrong. The rest is up to you. Which is the kind of thing you say when you've done everything in your power and it hasn't been enough. And when the truth is that what needs to change was never within your power in the first place. That particular flavor of helplessness, of having been brilliant and thorough and devoted and still insufficient, is one of the sadder things the show has produced in its recency. And it's wrapped in the setup of a pandemic satire about a pangolin and Golan, which is the kind of thing a person says when they've run out of other options and the time machine isn't working. In 2006, Season 10, Al Gore, the former vice president, recent Oscar winner, freshly minted climate change advocate, arrived in South Park. He wanted the boys' help finding a monster, a creature he had invented or possibly encountered or possibly was using as a metaphor. It wasn't entirely clear. Half man, half bear, half pig. ManBearPig. He was serial about it, super serial. The episode is, from start to finish, a satire of political self-importance. Al Gore doesn't actually care about ManBearPig in any meaningful way. He cares about having an audience. He leads the boys into a cave to search for the creature, nearly gets them killed through his own recklessness and ego. And by the end of it, the episode treats the whole thing as a parable about how a worthy message can be comprehensively undermined by an unworthy messenger. ManBearPig appears again in Imagination Land, on the evil side, among the dark imaginary things. This seems to confirm it. The creature lives in the Imagination Land episode. ManBearPig is depicted as an imaginary creature that becomes real. Real. Al Gore was wrong. The show left it there for 12 years. In 2018, Season 22, ManBearPig returned. Actually, physically, undeniably returned. And this time it was genuinely real, actually attacking people, actually causing devastation across South Park in a way that was entirely physical and entirely undeniable. Al Gore showed up as he had to and stood in the middle of the chaos and said, he told them. He had been telling them for years. He had been laughed at and dismissed and made into a punchline. And now here they all were in the actual presence of the actual thing he had been warning about. The boys had to apologize to him. The structural thing I find interesting about this reversal is how quietly it was done. There was no press release, no interview where Parker or Stone said we got the 2006 episode wrong. The correction arrived entirely inside the fiction, dressed in the same silly premise as the original joke. ManBearPig is here. He's real. He's eating people. You can see why we dismissed the warning, and you can see what that dismissal cost. And the apology the boys give Gore doesn't resolve anything. Gore doesn't accept it graciously and move on. He's a bit strange about it, actually, still grandiose. Still a little more in love with his own significance than the moment requires. The show isn't rehabilitating Gore as a person. It's distinguishing between the messenger and the message. You can find a person annoying and still owe their message a serious response. You can dismiss someone as self-aggrandizing and still be wrong about whether what they're saying is true. That's a fairly sophisticated distinction to make, and the show makes it without ever pausing to explain it. The episode trusts you to follow the logic. Gore was insufferable and correct. Both things were always true. The insufferability is what made the correction easier to avoid. The correctness is what made the avoidance costly. ManBearPig eventually returns in subsequent seasons, consistently real, consistently dangerous, requiring actual concerted action to deal with. The joke version of the creature is gone. What replaced it is something the show has to take seriously and does. This is a remarkable creative decision. Parker and Stone wrote an episode in 2006 in which Al Gore's climate warnings were made into a joke, in which the show's targets were his manner and ego rather than his message, in which the creature he described was rendered imaginary and the man was rendered absurd. And then 12 years later, in Time to Get Cereal, they corrected themselves. They brought ManBearPig back as real. They had the boys acknowledge that their dismissal had been wrong, that the thing they refused to take seriously had been worth taking seriously the whole time. This doesn't happen very often, a show writing an episode that retroactively criticizes one of its own earlier episodes, without fanfare, without a press release, just by making the thing it mocked into a genuine threat. South Park, which built its reputation on puncturing the self-seriousness of everyone who thought they had important things to say, quietly admitted that Al Gore had important things to say. The paradox here isn't a contradiction within the show's mythology, it's a contradiction between the show's stated positions. Season 10's Al Gore episode is, implicitly, a joke at the expense of climate alarm. Season 22's ManBearPig arc is, implicitly, an acknowledgement that climate alarm was warranted. These two episodes can both exist within the same canonical universe. ManBearPig existed but had never been encountered yet. So Gore's warnings were technically real even in 2006, but what they're saying about the real world are in tension with each other, and the show doesn't really resolve it. It doesn't issue a corrective or recant the 2006 episode. It just produces the 2018 episode, lets the apology happen, and moves on. The earlier joke is still out there. The later acknowledgement is also out there. They sit beside each other in the canon, and viewers can take from each what they will. What I find genuinely interesting about this is that it's probably the most honest thing the show has ever done about how positions change. People change their minds. A joke that felt accurate in 2006 might look different in 2018. A dismissal that felt earned might eventually feel like something to apologize for. South Park, the show that always acts like it knows exactly where it stands on everything, quietly demonstrated that sometimes you have to go back and reckon with what you said before. One of the things the ManBearPig arc does that I think is underappreciated is that it requires the show to take Al Gore seriously as a person without asking you to like him. That's a harder needle to thread than it sounds. The 2006 episode was very comfortable being unkind to Gore. The 2018 arc has to somehow retain his essential Goreness, the grandiosity, the self-importance, the way he talks about ManBearPig as though his personal relationship to the monster is what makes it significant, while also taking the substance of what he's saying entirely seriously. He can be exactly who he is and also be right. These aren't in tension, they just coexist. The boys apologize for not believing him. Gore accepts the apology in a way that is still slightly too much about himself. He wasn't wrong to believe, he wasn't wrong to warn. He was, and remains, the kind of person who makes the warning harder to receive than it should be. The show holds all of this at once without resolving any of it into a lesson, which is, in a roundabout way, itself a lesson. The shape of a warning matters less than the truth of it. The quality of the messenger is a separate variable from the accuracy of the message. You can find a way to take something seriously while still finding the person delivering it genuinely difficult to be around. The show didn't have to make Gore suddenly charming or self-aware. It just had to make ManBearPig real. The rest followed from that. The ManBearPig situation also has a quiet implication for every other running joke in South Park. Every creature or concept that the show introduced as obviously absurd, as clearly the product of someone's ego or delusion or desire for attention. The show has now established definitively that things it presented as jokes can turn out to be real. ManBearPig was introduced as the satirical embodiment of unfounded alarm and turned out to be an actual monster, which means that anything else in the South Park universe that was presented as someone's delusion could potentially also be real. The member berries, the Super Adventure Club, the various cults and conspiracies and fringe belief systems the show has parodied across its run, any of these could turn out to have been more real than they appeared, if the show decided they needed to be. The precedent has been set. The audience has been taught by the ManBearPig reveal that dismissal is not permanent. ManBearPig is real. Al Gore was serial. The boys are sorry, they've moved on because this is South Park and everything moves on. But the apology happened, and that in itself is enough. Take a breath. Settle in however you need to. South Park is a show about a town, but South Park is also occasionally a show that exists within its own town. Characters in South Park watch South Park. The line between what's satirized and what's real and what's the show's own self-image folds back on itself in ways that are hard to trace without getting slightly dizzy. You're Getting Old aired in season 15 in 2011. In it, Stan Marsh turns 10 years old, birthday he has presumably had before and will presumably have again, and develops a condition where everything sounds and looks to him like literal excrement. Music he used to love sounds like someone defecating. Films that everyone around him enjoys look like footage of bodily functions. His cynicism has crossed some internal threshold and become perceptual. The world has genuinely changed for him. His parents separate. The strain in the Marsh household that the episode lets breathe and develop is handled in a way the show doesn't usually allow. By the end, Stan is alone, parents separated, friends moved on from him slightly, still seeing and hearing nothing but miserable noise where everyone else sees the things they've always enjoyed. The episode ends on him sitting in his room with a version of the show's theme music playing at a slightly different register, something underneath it that wasn't usually there. The following episode, Asperger's, resolves this arc by having Stan discover that alcohol temporarily makes the world look and sound normal again. He starts drinking to function. This is presented without much subtlety as a bad coping mechanism, but it works in the short term, and by the end of the episode, Stan is back with his friends. Things apparently return to normal. Except, if you're paying attention, the cynicism Stan developed doesn't disappear. Not entirely. It gets managed, suppressed, medicated with whatever's in that hip flask. But it's still there, underneath the apparent normalcy of subsequent episodes. The show occasionally lets it show. Stan will say something that sounds subtly different from how he used to sound. A kind of flat exhaustion under the words, a sense that he's choosing to function rather than feeling okay. Was this Parker and Stone using Stan as a vehicle for their own complicated feelings about what their show had become? They've never confirmed it. They've also never denied it. There's also 6 Days to Air, the 2011 documentary that Comedy Central made about the show's production process. Not a South Park episode, an actual documentary with Parker and Stone as themselves, showing the production sprint that every episode represents. Parker sitting at a desk at 3 a.m, exhausted, working on dialogue that will be on television in a few hours. The seams of a show that looks effortless coming completely visible. I find this documentary does something interesting to the rest of the show. Once you've seen it, you can't quite unsee it. The show that looks casual is the product of near constant controlled panic. The indifference the characters display toward the rules of their world is matched by the indifference the production has to the normal constraints of television. They just keep making it, under deadline, without much time to check whether this new thing contradicts something they said 9 seasons ago. Making the joke that seems right this week and worrying about the continuity some other time, which is probably how you end up with all the paradoxes we've talked about tonight. Then there's A Million Little Fibers in season 10, almost entirely about Towley, the anthropomorphic talking towel who shows up periodically to be high and give towel-related advice, writing a memoir and appearing on Oprah Winfrey's show. The main characters don't appear. South Park barely appears. And one of its running bits is told from the perspective of Oprah's genitals named Gary and Minji, who are developing their own consciousness and grievances. This is an episode of South Park in which South Park is largely absent, featuring a character who exists on the absolute periphery of the show's universe, with a joke about autonomous genitalia as the B-plot. It aired to mixed reviews from people who wanted the show to be about the boys, and to genuine appreciation from people who understood that Parker and Stone were experimenting with just how far you could get from the premise before the thing fell apart entirely. Pretty far, it turned out. South Park doesn't need South Park, apparently. What connects all of these meta gestures, Stan's depression arc, the Tao Li memoir, the documentary, the show that exists within its own universe, is a consistent interest in the gap between what something appears to be and what it actually is. Stan appears to be fine. He isn't. Tao Li appears to be a peripheral joke character. He's also capable of carrying an entire satirical subplot about memoir culture. The show appears to be the effortless, breezy product of two guys who don't really care. The documentary reveals it as the product of near constant managed panic. South Park has always been, at some level, a show about performed indifference. The whole posture of it, the we don't care what you think about what we're doing, we're going to do it anyway, energy that Parker and Stone have maintained for nearly 3 decades, is a performance, a real and effective one, genuinely reflective of who they are, but a performance nonetheless. And occasionally the show cracks the performance open, lets you see the machinery underneath, and then snaps it shut again. The You're Getting Old arc is the most extended version of this. It's the show admitting, through Stan, that the effort of maintaining relentless irreverence has a cost. That looking at everything through the lens of critique and satire can curdle into the inability to enjoy anything. That not caring is sometimes just a more defended version of caring very much. The arc doesn't resolve this. Stan goes back to the bus stop and resumes his life, but the question was asked. The seam was visible for 2 episodes, and you can't quite unsee it. South Park has a specific cosmology, by which I mean, over the years, the show has quietly established claims about what God is, what hell is, what happens when you die. And these claims don't always agree with each other, but they also don't quite cancel each other out. The result is a picture of the universe that is unlike anything else in television mythology. We know hell exists and is supervised by Satan, who, as we discussed earlier, is more emotionally complex than most fictional representations of evil. Satan has appeared since the earliest seasons, been in the film, had a subplot running through multiple season arcs. His primary recurring problem is that he keeps falling for romantic partners who take advantage of his good nature. Saddam Hussein in particular spent multiple episodes manipulating him from a position of romantic dominance, and Satan, literally the ruler of hell, kept falling for it because he just wanted to be loved. We know God occasionally appears and has opinions. Season 3's Are You There, God? It's Me, Jesus, has Jesus trying to produce a genuine miracle to compete with the Y2K fervor, calling upon God to make something happen. God appears. He's rather small, doesn't say much, produces a visible miracle, and leaves. This is treated as a significant event. Multiple seasons later, the existence and nature of God is not something anyone seems to have incorporated into their worldview in any meaningful way. The show has also established, played as a joke, and never quite walked back, that most people end up in hell because the Mormons were correct and nobody followed their teachings. Various characters who are clearly not Mormon have met various afterlife outcomes that don't follow from it. The rule applies until it doesn't. South Park has produced a world in which the existence of God and the devil are confirmed facts, accessible to the boys through direct experience, and in which this knowledge has not substantively changed anything about how anyone lives or what anyone believes. The town has various churches and various theological disputes, but the empirical fact that God is real and hell is accessible and Satan occasionally attends town events has had essentially no effect on the spiritual life of South Park, Colorado. Maybe the show is saying something about how people actually respond to evidence, that even direct confirmation of the things people claim to believe doesn't necessarily alter their behavior, because the behavior was never really about belief in the first place. That's a fairly sophisticated point, and it might be intentional, but it might also just be that the show needed God and Satan as recurring characters, and didn't want to deal with the sociological consequences of confirmed divine contact. The consequence either way is a town where the metaphysical architecture is visible, and daily life proceeds in the same slightly chaotic way it always has. You can have breakfast with God and still argue about whose turn it is to hold the remote. The rules of the South Park universe are less like the laws of physics, fixed, consistent, applying equally to everything, and more like the rules of a family home. There are rules. Everyone knows the rules. The rules are enforced until they're not, broken when it's convenient, revisited when someone brings them up, and mostly just lived around by people who are getting on with things. Let me tell you about one of my favorite structural oddities in the show, because it involves a story that changed its own rules from the inside, which is a fairly unusual thing to attempt. Woodland Critter Christmas aired in Season 8 in 2004, and it's framed from the very first second as a traditional holiday special. There's a narrator. The narrator is warm and declarative in the way children's holiday stories usually are, setting scenes, describing characters, guiding us through the events with a kind of gentle authority. The animation has a slightly stylized quality that emphasizes the fairy tale framing, soft, rounded edges, snow that falls prettily. The woodland critters are sweet. They're exactly as charming as they look. A porcupine, a rabbit, a beaver, other small forest animals, and they befriend Stan and ask for his help building a manger for the birth of their savior. And then, gradually, the story reveals itself. The critters worship Satan. The birth they're anticipating isn't a benign one. The things they do to celebrate and the things they do to each other and to anyone who gets in their way are genuinely disturbing in a way that sits very oddly against the cheerful narrator and the soft animation. The narrator is still there, guiding us through, but something has happened to the story he's telling. It has become something he cannot have intended to tell. About halfway through, the narrator notices. He begins to improvise. He tries to change what happens, introducing plot elements, altering the direction, steering events away from where they seem to be heading. He can't quite make it work. The story resists his intervention. Things continue happening in ways he doesn't want them to happen. He's narrating something he can't control. At the end, the episode reveals that this entire story was written by Cartman. It was a creative writing assignment for class. He hands it in. His teacher grades it a C+. So, the warm, confident narrator of a children's holiday special turns out to have been narrating a story by a 10-year-old boy with extremely specific ideas about holiday content. The frame of the story, the narrator who guides us, the cheerful visual style, the sense of reliable authority, was a layer being applied over something that had no interest in being guided. The form and the content were working against each other the whole time, and the form lost. The narrator does not know what he's in. He finds out over the course of the episode, and he doesn't have the power to change it. And by the end, all he can do is confirm what the audience has already worked out. Someone else wrote this, and it wasn't him. There's a small version of that experience in watching South Park generally, I think. You arrive with certain expectations about what kind of show this is, what register it operates in, what it's willing to do, what the rules are. And then every so often it does something that shifts the ground. The Mysterion revelation. The chef farewell. You're getting old. Moments where the thing you assumed you were watching turns out to be something slightly different, where the cheerful framing was covering something more uncomfortable. The woodland critters knew what they were in all along. The narrator thought he did. The gap between those two positions is in miniature the gap the whole show lives in. The teacher gave it a C+, which feels about right for something that ambitious and that strange, not quite a masterwork, not easy to dismiss either, somewhere in the middle, doing something unusual, waiting for someone to notice. The question the Woodland Critter Christmas special quietly raises and doesn't answer is whether any narrator can ever fully know what they're inside. The frame of a story is supposed to provide control. You're here, this is what's happening, I'll guide you through it. The narrator of the Critter Christmas special believes this about his own role. He believes he's telling a cheerful story. He is not. and the correction he attempts once he realizes the improvised interventions, the hastily introduced plot elements designed to steer the narrative somewhere better, are unsuccessful not because he's a bad narrator, but because the story isn't his. It was never his. Cartman wrote it. The narrator has authority over the voice, but not over the content, and those two things are usually assumed to be the same thing. They're not. What this implies about storytelling in general is something I find myself returning to occasionally, because it applies beyond the metafiction of a South Park Christmas episode. Every story has both a teller and a source. The teller shapes the words, the source determines what the words are about, and the two don't always agree about what kind of story they're in. The narrator thinks he's in one kind of story. Cartman, who wrote it, had something else in mind entirely. The gap between those two intentions is where the episode lives. It's also where a lot of South Park lives, actually. The show often presents itself as one kind of story, a satirical comedy, a shock value provocation, a fart joke extended to episode length, while being secretly another kind. The Mysterion arc presents as superhero parody and is secretly about isolation and the limits of being known. The post-COVID specials present as science fiction and are secretly about whether friendship can survive the passage of time and the accumulation of failure. The narrator says one thing. The source underneath says another. The C+ was for the story Cartman put on paper. The A might go to something the episode was doing that nobody assigned it. The C+ grade is also doing something specific. Not an A, which would be the grade you'd give a story that succeeded at what it was trying to do, which the show has decided is too generous. Not an F, which would be the grade you'd give something that failed entirely, a C+. Acceptable, above average, but only just. A grade that says we can tell something was attempted here, and we're not sure what to do with it, which is actually a fair grade for Woodland Critter Christmas as a piece of television. The episode is doing something genuinely unusual, a meta-narrative within a narrative, a frame that gets invaded by the content it's supposed to be organizing, a cheerful holiday aesthetic pushed into service of the exact opposite of cheerful holiday content. It succeeds at all of this, but is also a Season 8 South Park episode that ends with a reveal that Cartman wrote the whole thing, which means the meta-twist is itself serving the show's most reliable character note, that Cartman's imagination is darker than anything the narrative frame can contain. The narrator of the Woodland Critter Christmas special is doing what most of us do when we encounter something that doesn't fit our expectations, trying to guide it toward a better ending, trying to impose a shape on material that refuses to be shaped, trying to be the voice of reason in a story that doesn't want one. He fails, the show fails him by design, and Cartman gets a C+. And here, near the end of the list, is the broadest paradox, the one that contains all the others, the one that is less a specific incident and more the fundamental nature of what South Park is and has always been. South Park has rules, or rather, South Park behaves as if it has rules in the way that a town behaves as if it has rules. There are norms and expectations and patterns that recur, things that feel settled about this place. Kenny dies, Cartman schemes. Kyle is the conscience. Stan is the audience surrogate who eventually has to say what the episode's point is. Mr. Garrison teaches, regardless of what form he's currently in. Randy Marsh does something enormous and stupid, and the repercussions eventually pass. These are the rules. They are also not the rules. They are the shape the show has worn into itself through repetition, grooves in the fabric rather than laws of the universe. And when the show needs them to not apply, they simply don't. The Stick of Truth, released in 2014, is a role-playing video game set in South Park that received genuinely strong reviews. Parker and Stone wrote it. The boys exist in it as characters. The events of the game are treated within the game as real events happening to real characters in the show's world. In it, an ancient stick, a normal tree branch, is treated by the children of South Park as an object of supreme cosmic importance. Whoever holds the stick rules the universe. The adults in town go along with this, as they always do when the boys are playing games, which is to say they initially ignore it and then become inexplicably and deeply invested in it as the stakes escalate. The show's canon now contains, as confirmed facts, God, Satan, Kenny's resurrection curse, multiple visits to hell, a cosmologically significant stick of wood, 2 separate superhero factions made up of children in capes, and Cartman's hand puppet, which may or may not have independent knowledge of genetics. All of this coexists. None of it is more or less real than anything else in the show. The stick is exactly as real as God. The show does not rank its mythologies or create a hierarchy of what counts. Everything counts the same amount, which is to say, it counts until the episode is over, and then it counts as much as the show needs it to count in the next episode, which is usually slightly less. The rules that were never rules include, in particular, the rule about what's real. Real is whatever the show needs right now. Imaginary is what the show doesn't need this week. The categories are flexible, the edges are soft. One specific example that I find illustrative is the ManBearPigs, introduced in Season 20 in 2016. The ManBearPigs are small, grape-like creatures who talk and whose entire mode of existence is to make people feel nostalgic. They say things like, "Remember Ghostbusters" and "Remember when movies were simpler?" And people who eat them feel warm and uncritically happy about the things they used to love, regardless of whether those things deserve that warmth. The ManBearPigs are a satire of nostalgia as a political force, specifically of the 2016 election and the "Make America Great Again" sentiment. The way appeals to an imagined better past can bypass critical thinking and produce emotional responses that override rational ones. The show treated them as a genuine threat, not as a joke creature that existed for one episode, as something that persisted, that spread, that had genuine influence on the events of that season. And then the ManBearPigs essentially disappeared from the narrative without resolution. They're in the show's mythology, technically somewhere. There are still ManBearPigs doing ManBearPig things, but the show moved on. The rules about what they were capable of, what they were doing, where the storyline was going, were abandoned when the season ended and the next one began with a different set of concerns. This is South Park in miniature. The ManBearPigs matter until they don't. Their story arc opens and doesn't close. And the show treats this not as a failure of craft, but as the natural rhythm of the place. Things happen, things stop happening, something else starts happening. The town absorbs everything and returns to its baseline. And the boys will be at the bus stop tomorrow, regardless of whether the cosmic architecture of their universe is internally consistent. There's also the question of what the ManBearPigs tell us about the show's self-awareness, because they're not just a satire of external nostalgia. They're also, implicitly, a satire of the show's own relationship to its past. South Park has spent years returning to beloved old characters and concepts, bringing back recurring gags from early seasons, mining its own history for callbacks that the audience will recognize and enjoy. The show participates in nostalgia culture while simultaneously criticizing it. It makes you feel ManBearPigs about South Park while warning you about the dangers of feeling ManBearPigs. This is the show existing inside a paradox about its own existence. The same cultural mechanism it's satirizing is one it relies on. The early season callbacks, the occasional appearances by characters from long ago, the deliberate echoes of iconic moments, these are all versions of Member When. The show's aware of this. It doesn't resolve it. It just keeps making the callbacks while the ManBearPigs wander through the background, saying small, warm, slightly addictive things about the past. Now, why doesn't any of this collapse the show? That's the question I keep coming back to. Because it should, in theory. Most shows that try to accumulate this much mythology end up collapsing under the weight of it. Inconsistencies become plot holes become fan frustration becomes a corrosive presence in how people engage with the show. South Park seems largely immune to this process. The inconsistencies accumulate and somehow don't corrode anything. The show remains what it's always been. Part of it is the tone. The show's consistent irreverence functions as a kind of permission structure. When a show is this openly unbothered about everything, including itself, it's harder to be bothered about it on its behalf. Part of it is the speed. A show that makes itself this fast, this close to current events under these conditions is going to have contradictions. The contradictions are the evidence of the ambition. You can't be mad at the cracks in something built this quickly because the speed is part of the point. And part of it, I think the biggest part, is that the show has always been about chaos resisting resolution. The premise is that nothing in South Park ever truly resolves. Problems come and go, sometimes they come back. The town absorbs them and returns to its baseline of low-level absurdity. The boys are at the same corner they've always been. This is normal. This is what normal looks like here. In a world where consistency is supposed to signal trustworthiness, South Park has spent nearly 30 years being defiantly inconsistent and utterly trustworthy in the one way that matters. You know what you're going to get when you sit down with it. The specific details are unpredictable. The general feeling is not. That's the paradox that contains all the others. All right, I think we've covered a fair amount of ground tonight. 14 paradoxes, or 14 knots maybe, which is a better word for them. Problems that you can see clearly, that you can hold in your hands and examine, but that won't come undone no matter how long you work at them. Kenny's death and resurrection tied to a cult, and free beer, and a mother who jolts awake in the night. Cartman's father, who is the man in the chili, who was always there in the story and nobody said anything for 9 seasons. The boys who are 10 years old and have been 10 years old through decades of a world that didn't stay still around them. ManBearPig, real after all. Chef, gone in a way that nothing else in this town is truly gone. The imagination land nuke that destroyed and didn't destroy. The free speech episode that couldn't be freely distributed. Mysterion, alone, unknown, going home to be reborn. Butters in a room waiting for parents who aren't coming back. The narrator who didn't know what story he was inside. When you lay them all out like that, they stop looking like a list of writing errors or production oversights. They start to look like a portrait of something. The specific texture of a show built under deadline, making the joke that seems right this week, trusting the audience to keep up, not always checking whether this new thing fits with the old things. A show that always seemed sure of itself and was, underneath, figuring it out episode by episode like everyone else. I've been thinking lately about the post-COVID specials and what they say about the show's relationship to its own longevity. We're supposed to accept that 40 years in the future, the boys are adults in their 50s. We're shown who they became. And the show then continues making episodes with them as 10-year-olds, because of course it does, because it has to. But those two futures now coexist, the permanent childhood and the specific, imagined, deliberately detailed adulthood that the show constructed and then set aside. And the fact that the show bothered to construct it at all suggests something. It means Parker and Stone thought about it. They asked the question, who are these people, really, if we follow them all the way through? What do they become? What do they regret? What do they carry? The answer they came up with, Stan disconnected, Kyle still trying, Cartman comfortable and selfish, Kenny wise and quietly devoted, feels earned. Not because it follows logically from the earlier seasons exactly, but because it feels emotionally true to who these characters have always been underneath the chaos. Stan was always the one who absorbed everything until it was too much. Kyle was always the one who believed things could be better. Cartman was always going to be fine in a way that cost everyone around him something. And Kenny was always, quietly, the one who cared most. That's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that holds all the contradictions together without resolving them. Across 14 paradoxes, across 28 seasons of broken rules and dropped storylines and characters who age and then don't. And deaths that mean nothing and deaths that mean everything underneath all of it, these 4 characters are consistent. not in the events of their lives, which are wildly, contradictorily inconsistent, in who they fundamentally are. Stan worries, Kyle argues, Cartman manipulates, Kenny endures. I want to come back to Kenny one more time before we wind down, because his arc is the one that stays with me most clearly. Not because it's the most elaborate or the most formally clever. The Cartman father situation probably wins that category, but because of what it says about who gets to carry the weight in a story. Kenny is designed to be overlooked. The muffled voice, the parka, the position in the group as the fourth one, the one who doesn't have Kyle's moral authority or Cartman's charisma or Stan's relatability. He's peripheral by design. His deaths were jokes by design. The show built him to be exactly the kind of character you might not notice. And then it turned out he noticed everything. It turned out he'd been dying and being reborn in total isolation through the entire run of the show. It turned out he was the one who, in adulthood, most clearly saw what was happening to the people he loved and worked hardest to do something about it. The most overlooked character turned out to have been paying the most attention the whole time. There's something in that which feels true beyond the show. The people who make the least noise are often the ones absorbing the most, the ones whose voices are muffled by circumstance or by the dynamics of a group, or just by the way attention naturally distributes itself toward the loudest and most visible. Those people are frequently watching, noticing, caring in ways that only become visible when it's almost too late. Kenny left a hard drive hidden in his own body, addressed to the people he'd spent his life trying to help. That's what 40 years of caring looks like in the South Park universe. Not a monument, not a legacy. A small piece of data kept in the only place he was sure they'd look, saying, "Here's what Kenny's message. I like girls with big fat titties. I like girls with big vaginas." Tried. The rest is yours. The boys got on with it, eventually. Because this is South Park, and everything eventually gets on with it. But the hard drive is still there. No rule the show has ever broken changes that. No paradox the show has ever constructed unsettles it. You could watch any random episode from any random season, and those four people would be recognizably themselves, even if the details of their ages and their histories and the laws of their universe didn't quite add up. There's also something in the collective experience of watching this show that doesn't get talked about much, which is how differently it lands depending on when you first came to it. Someone who started watching in 1997 and has never stopped has a completely different relationship to these characters than someone who discovered it in 2010 or who grew up with the post-COVID specials as their entry point. The South Park each generation of viewers got is genuinely different, not just in content, but in what it was responding to and what it thought the world needed to hear. The show from the early seasons is faster, cruder. The middle seasons, arguably, are where it found its stride as a satirical force. The later seasons are more interested in Randy Marsh as a kind of ongoing case study in how a person can be simultaneously deeply beloved and comprehensively impossible. And the recent seasons feel like a show that is in genuine conversation with itself, aware of what it is, aware of what it's been, still finding things to say. Each era has its contradictions. Each era assumes that the previous era's rules are the rules and then quietly revises them. The show you think you're watching when you start is never quite the show you're actually in, which is one more reason the paradoxes feel less like mistakes and more like features. A show that changed this much over this long couldn't possibly be internally consistent, and trying to make it so would have required someone to hold still, and Parker and Stone have never been interested in holding still. Anyway, it's late, or early, depending on how you're counting. I hope something in all of that was pleasant to drift along with. The town is still out there if you ever want to go back. The boys will be at the bus stop tomorrow morning. The mountains will be exactly where they always are. Mr. Garrison will be in his classroom one way or another. Kyle will be about to say something that will get ignored. Cartman will be planning something that will probably end badly for everyone. And somewhere, in a small house on the wrong side of town, A woman in a quiet kitchen is putting a tiny orange parka on a newborn baby and trying not to feel too bad about the free beer. The show's continuity, in the end, is not about events, it's about character. The specific way Kyle holds a grudge. The specific quality of Stan's eventual resignation when a situation goes past a certain point of absurdity. The specific register of Cartman's voice when he's genuinely trying to convince someone of something versus when he's performing sincerity as a manipulation. These things hold. These things have held across nearly 3 decades of episodes that contradict each other on nearly everything else. There's also something in how the show holds its friendships. The 4 boys have, at various points, been at war with each other. They've betrayed each other, abandoned each other, broken up in ways that look deafened. Season 15's 2-part arc briefly treated the dissolution of the group as a permanent condition before ultimately restoring their friendships. Dition. Season 20 had Kyle and Stan barely speaking. The friendships fracture regularly and then reassemble regularly without the fractures being explicitly healed. They just continue. The friendship persists not because the characters have resolved their problems with each other, but because the show keeps bringing them back to the same bus stop. And at the bus stop, they're still them together in whatever configuration the episode requires. Maybe that's the deepest thing the show has ever said about friendship, if it said anything at all, that it's not really about resolution. You don't fix a friendship and then maintain the fix. You just keep showing up. You keep being there at the same place at the same time through all the arguments and betrayals and paradoxes and terrible ideas and chilly festivals. You keep being present, the bus comes, they get on, sleep well, and I'll see